took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they flash away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain? Knowing that your eyes are blinded by the light.
He is the free American Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon down from the sky and drop the sun.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I am Clay Douglas. My guest today is James Perloff. He is the author of Truth is a Lonely Warrior and more. I want to touch on all of his books if possible. The Shadows of Power, Tornado in a Junkyard, and The Case Against Darwin that I find really intriguing. And I've been on his website most of the morning here. It's jamesperloff.com. I highly recommend you go there. And he's right up at the top. He's got a quote by Thomas Jefferson that is so relevant to us journalists, us truth seekers, us warriors. I mean, it's like I say in my introduction here, I took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. There was no expiration date. Thomas Jefferson said, "Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. The real extent of the state of misinformation is known only to those who are in situations to confront facts within their knowledge. With the lies of the day, I really look with commiseration over the great body of my fellow citizens who, reading newspapers, live and die in the belief they have known something of what has been passing in the world." This is in a letter to John Norvell, June 14th, 1807. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Jefferson's quote remains extremely relevant, of course, perhaps even more so, especially as we've seen the means of media expanded from the newspaper print that was the method of his day to extend it to radio in the 20s and 30s, and then to television and now web broadcasts, of course. And so I said you could easily substitute the phrase television news anchors or television news broadcasts for the word newspapers, and what Jefferson said, and it remains true. And again, probably more so because of the consolidated control of the media we have today.
We've got every television station is owned by, every broadcasting is basically owned by one corporation. Who the president, who the vice president of those corporations are, I don't know. We could probably find out with intense research, but not sure it would make any difference. They're just chess pieces on a board.
Well, I could mention some of them, but yeah, we do have 6 corporations owning over 90% of the media. That's Time Warner, Disney, Viacom, News Corp, and CBS and NBC Universal. But to look at some of those figures that are running them, you know, I wrote a book called The Shadows of Power, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with. It published in 1988, and it's still selling today, and talks about the Council of Foreign Relations, which is what it's the organization the oligarchy uses to school its people, to turn them into department heads in the U.S. government. And of course, they have a lot of their people spread throughout the media in the CFR. So if you take a look, for example, at Fox, you've got Roger Ailes, the chairman and CEO of Fox, is in the CFR. And of course, News Corp as the umbrella that Fox falls under. Rupert Murdoch was in the CFR, just stepped down. And you go to CNN, you've got Jeffrey Bewkes, who's the president of Time Warner, is in the CFR, and a lot of their news anchors like Judy Woodruff and Paula Zahn and Aaron Burnett have been members. And you go back to the old days, Time Magazine, Henry Luce, the founder, was CFR, and CBS's founder, William Paley, was CFR, and a lot of their broadcasters, Dan Rather, Leslie Stahl, over the years. NBC's founder, Robert Sarnoff, was CFR, and you go from Bill Moyers through Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams, all CFR. Same thing with the New York Times and ABC with David Brinkley, and the Washington Post with Eugene Meyer, and PBS with the McNeil Lehrer people. So it's been the same group all along. You've got monolithic media control, and that's why the public has what it believes is a consensus. It's actually a false consensus, what has been termed a big lie. You repeat the lie often enough, people believe it, and it's easier to repeat a lie when you're switching your TV dial and every station is saying the exact same thing because they've got this common universal ownership.
Yeah, and the whole term consensus really pushes my buttons, because what a consensus is, folks, is if somebody gives you their idea of the way things are supposed to do, and you sit there and keep your mouth shut, then they just write you off as being part of the consensus. We got your vote, because you didn't stand up and say, wait a minute.
I guess that's what they call the silent majority. I'll give an example of the big lie and how it can be created. You might remember the old TV show called Candid Camera.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 60s. They had an episode that I still remember, and I checked on the internet. Some people still remember this episode. And what they did was, you know, of course, on Candid Camera, they used to put a camera on some unsuspecting individual, didn't know he was being filmed, to see what he might do in a given situation. And this situation, on a city street, they put up these signs that said backward zone. And they would have these paid actors come on the city street, and when they reached the sign that said backward zone, they would immediately turn around and walk backwards. And then the camera would focus on some non-actor, some unsuspecting citizen, and it was amazing how many real people actually turned around and walked backwards just because they thought there was a consensus that this is the backward zone, and that's what you do in the backward zone. You walk down the street backwards. And there was even one woman who scolded her child for not walking backwards in the backward zone. So that's an example of how swiftly a falsely created big lie or consensus can be used to convince people that something ridiculous is true. And they've become experts at convincing people that the ridiculous is true. That the recent fake shootings are an example.
I think the perfect example of that is 9/11. Anybody that believes that a 100-story skyscraper can be knocked down by a flame at the top is like saying a candle melts from the bottom. You know, it's why would people buy into that? I mean, I watched that and watched the news report, and I was astounded. I was astounded. It almost got me killed because I put building number 7 on the cover. Gee, no plane hit this one. How did that one fall down?
Well, I don't know, Clay. I gave a 46-story steel skyscraper a good kick the other day. It collapsed right down, so I think it's possible. It's possible. No, but you're quite right, and that is why the Truth Movement has made building number 7 the beginning point for a lot of the arguments about it. Just appealing to people's logic. If you're going to claim that the Twin Towers fell because of burning kerosene fuel from those planes, how is it that the building 7 collapsed when no plane even hit it?
That's right. What is wrong with people? Now, I don't know if you get into that. I mean, this goes beyond what I can understand. And I have told people on my radio show for 20 years, I've been doing this for over 20 years, that they don't call television a programming for nothing. It's, you know, and actually I am a hypnotist. I taught myself how to hypnotize people. And I used to do it fairly regular, you know, just for fun. Until I lost a friend by sticking him to his chair, you know. And but the people in America, they appear to me to be hypnotized, totally controlled, programmed. I say this on my show almost every day. They don't call television programming for nothing.
Well, Clay, what I'm hoping is that you'll use your hypnosis skills on the president, vice president, chiefs of staff, and the U.S. Congress and the television news anchors and turn them right around. So if you could just get an audience with them, I think we might be in pretty good shape.
If they could put me on television, and they won't, you know, when I started the militias back in 20 years ago, 1994, and immediately they came down on me, the propaganda machines, ADL, Southern Poverty Law, that kind of thing, they came down on me. And nobody ever interviewed me. Nobody. They demonized me. They gave me credit for starting the militias around the country. My response was simply, what part of the Second Amendment don't you understand? But nobody ever put me on television. Nobody ever let me get to the public. What do you suppose that is?
Well, that means that they don't want the public to find out. That's what's called giving you the silent treatment. You have rational facts. You have the Constitution behind you. They are simply propaganda mongers who, as we've seen, especially in this past year, with this inexplicable rash of shootings, some of which appear certainly to be fake, obviously intended to be a gun grab. They obviously have that top of their priority. There's tens of millions of gun owners in America, and if you can have a police state and dominate the people, you know, they fear the awakened masses, but they don't fear them nearly as much if the awakened masses aren't armed. And so that's top priority, and that's why they wouldn't let a guy like you on the air to talk about such a subject.
You know, I've attended militia meetings, and they're my neighbors. They're my neighbors. They ain't no terrorists. You know, there's terrorists out there. There's terrorists out there. But it ain't my neighbors. And what it's become is the police. And, you know, now you studied history. Your books are an incredible source of information. I feel that we are moving in the same direction. That what happened in Russia? What happened to the Russian, white Russian Christians? What they had, what, 10 million, 12 million murdered, killed, wiped out, and communism took over. And we can talk about, you can talk about communism if you want, but I've covered the source and the beginnings of communism quite a bit on my show. Get a lot of heat for that, wouldn't you imagine? But
I can imagine.
What where are we going? I mean, you're right. They can't do it when we've all got the guns, but we are the police state. The killings by police. I mean, they're shooting women in the back in their vehicle with the kids in the back seat now. Something wrong with that. Something wrong with that. I found something wrong with that. And what is that? What are they trying to set us up for? How is their psychology working here? What do they keep us docile for long enough to kill some more? And I want to get your opinion. I'm gonna go get warm up my coffee. I want to get your opinion on the FEMA camps. I mean, are these work camps? Are these concentration camps? Are these for the illegal aliens that they're flying in? I mean, this, as far as I can tell, this is an invading force. They're bringing the illegal aliens in here by the plane load, and they're the same thing is happening in Europe with the Muslims, isn't it? I mean, so this is not just in America. You know, I guess they don't call it the New World Order for nothing.
Well, you've raised a couple of things there, the massive immigration and the FEMA camps. I think that the purpose, as I see it, of mass immigration is to create disorder, internal dissent. It's very politically correct to talk about multiculturalism today, but the fact is that a nation which is essentially united by common genetics, language, history, and culture is far less likely to break apart than one that's been having people come in from a great many cultures. Just as an example, if you take France, you might recall back, I think it was 2005, they had these massive riots and fires in France that the police couldn't contain. They're coming from Muslims that had come in. This is not a knock on Muslims, by the way. I'm just trying to talk about the strategy that the powers that be have here. When you have Muslims coming in by the million into France who don't identify with the French flag, who don't identify with French culture or history, or maybe not even speak the language, it's much easier to divide that nation. You know, there's an old principle called divide and conquer, and so it's much easier to take a nation. Same thing with England, with, you know, millions coming in from Pakistan and India and so forth. Again, this is not a knock on immigration. My wife's an immigrant, and sometimes you need immigrants definitely to come into a country, especially if you lack people with certain technical skills. You need them to come in. But the powers that be like to push immigration and people from diverse cultures coming in. It sounds politically correct because it divides the nation, creates clashes with people who don't share things in common. It's just much easier that way. If a nation like France is all Frenchmen, it's much easier to keep them united and strong as a nation than if they have been divided. So that's one. But as far as the FEMA camps go, I think it was Steve Quayle commented that you know, they didn't build gulags in Russia not to use them, and they didn't build concentration camps in Germany to keep them empty. So there's obviously a purpose there, and since they're aiming at a police state, that's very obvious. The number one logical person they would be targeting to put in those camps would be the dissidents, the constitutionalists, the gun owners, the veterans who have the military skills to oppose the police state. They're looking at world power. That's what their world government is about. That's what the Council on Foreign Relations is about. The Council on Foreign Relations, again, is the organization I talked about in my 1988 book, The Shadows of Power. Their goal since their inception has been a world government. They were, in fact, founded in 1921 as a direct reaction to the U.S. Senate's rejection of our entering the League of Nations, which is the first step towards which was the first step formally towards a world government. So they're after world government, consolidation of power, that is tyranny, and of course the camps are the places you put the dissidents.
Now, that first attempt at world government, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, so I don't know for sure, the reason it didn't get formed, the League of Nations didn't get formed, was two countries stood up against it: Russia, the Tsar, under the Tsar, and us. And what happened after that? Let's see. We had the Federal Reserve, and the Tsar got murdered. Am I off on my timeline, or is that accurate?
Oh, it's very accurate. You had all kinds of things coming together about 100 years ago. You know, the World War I broke out just 6 months after the Federal Reserve Act was passed. It wasn't that convenient that all of a sudden we had this source of ready cash to finance our entry into that war, which caused our debt to explode from, at the time, was $1 billion to $25 billion. Of course, there's many, many trillions of dollars now. But it's interesting that in 1917 you had the fall of the Tsar, and right after that the U.S. declared war. And I'm just going to make a conjecture here, which is based on some of the observers from Russia at that time, that Woodrow Wilson was holding off on the declaration of war until the Tsar stepped down, because had America come into the war, into World War I, before he did that, his position would have been bolstered. You know, Russia was our ally in World War I. So they wanted to make sure the Tsar fell first. Then we came into the war, and of course you had that same year the Bolsheviks taking over from Kerensky. That was very much an arranged thing. In fact, Kerensky had been the Grand Secretary of the Grand Orient Lodge of Russia before, and he invited Lenin and Trotsky to come back in, and by November they were in charge of the largest nation on earth. And at the same time, you had the Balfour Declaration in 1917, by which Britain, in return for the promise of the Zionists to bring America into the war, they promised the Zionists they would create a national Jewish homeland in Palestine, which became the modern Zionist state of Israel, which has been behind multiple false flags and attempted false flags, including the King Jordan Hotel bombing, the attack on USS Liberty in 1967. They tricked us into bombing Libya in 1986 with the LaBelle discotheque bombing by planting what they call a Trojan in Libya, which broadcast messages really coming from the Mossad's, claiming that Gaddafi was behind that discotheque bombing. And of course it's been going on ever since, with 9/11 being really the ultimate false flag today.
You know, just as a little aside here, Gaddafi was really demonized here in America, but he was one of the most benevolent, one of the best rulers in the Middle East. He built that underground river. He was financing his people, so buying them houses or building houses for them and everything.
Yes, they were prospering. I understand that before he fell, the average income in Libya was about 15,000 US per year. That's remarkable, and I don't think there's any other country in the North Africa or Middle East with that kind of income. And he was also proposing to put Africa itself on a gold standard called the dinar, the D-I-N-A-R, which of course was greatly feared by the banksters, and so he had to be taken out, and we're told we have to have NATO bomb him because there's a popular democratic uprising. Of course, those people fighting him were just mercenaries funded by Western intelligence services, and a lot of those weapons that they were using, and those people are now over in Syria trying to knock out Assad and calling themselves ISIS. So Gaddafi was definitely maligned. But if you go, I have a movie out produced by Free Mind Films. I scripted. I shouldn't call it my movie, but I wrote the script for it. It's called Shadow Ring. We have quite a few people in it. There's commentators Ben Swan and Joyce Riley and Jedward Griffin and Pastor Chuck Baldwin. And
I saw it on your website. It's on your website, and I've got your website linked.
Yeah. And Joyce Riley, a well-known radio show host, nationally syndicated, says in the movie, she said that she reached a point, she said, is it possible being lied to about everything? And, you know, people have to really get out of the matrix, and they're so used to thinking of Gaddafi as a terrorist, and he was not.
Well, let me ask you about that. There was somebody else that had the DNR, Saddam Hussein, and I'm not sure Saddam Hussein, since we found no weapons of mass destruction, I mean, wasn't he, you think he was in more or less the same category as Gaddafi? I mean, he did work for us. We used him and tried to use him to go after Libya. We backed him. If he had weapons of mass destructions, I mean, all they had to do is ask him for his receipt because he bought them from us or he got them from us. Maybe they didn't think of that.
I'm sure if your viewers haven't seen it, they can easily go online and see the interview with General Wesley Clark, former commander of NATO forces, at one time considered a potential presidential candidate. He gave an interview in which he said that shortly after 9/11, he was in the Pentagon. He was told that we're going to take out 7 countries in a matter of, I think it was 5 years. That was the target. But it included Syria and Iran and Iraq and Libya were among the 7 that were targeted. And so obviously you had to have, if you're planning to take these countries out anyway, you have to come out with an excuse. So for Iraq, it was the non-existent weapons of mass destruction. They never had them, and if they did, do you think they'd dare use them against America? And then, of course, with they tried to take out Assad with a phony claim that he used sarin gas, and they made these claims about Gaddafi. They had to have a false flag or a phony image of the person, but what they've obviously been doing is destabilizing the entire Middle East, and this was obvious, very obviously, at the centerpiece of the motives behind 9/11 that led to our extensive involvement in just war after war after war, all needless in the Middle East, and creating the potential for this greater Israel. And of course, you know that the Zionists not only are heavily linked to 9/11, but they are actually the sole beneficiary of that day's event.
And you know, I mean, I can't even. I've been studying this for some time. I can't even get my sons to wake up to the danger here. I mean, it's a danger to my grandchildren that this whole new world order thing that I've been talking about for 20 years, warning people about since I heard Bush. I keep Bush in my introduction on that. You know, they really come out and tell us what they're planning a lot of the time, don't they?
Well, they do drop hints about it. Of course, one of the, I don't mean to divert to this, but they, besides dropping a lot of hints about 9/11, which you can see in Hollywood movies, an amazing number of references to 9/11, Back to the Future just being one example. People can easily find that on YouTube, but now they're dropping a lot of hints about September of this year, the month that we just started, so especially around the 23rd. They definitely...
You mean the moon blowing up?
Well,
that's a favorite of one of my fans here. He thinks the moon's going to blow up on the end of September. But go ahead. What's happening in September?
I haven't heard that, but they are talking about. Well, first of all, there's no denying that a number of events are taking place in September. Just for example, we have Yom Kippur taking place on the 23rd, and on the 23rd, the Pope is going to arrive in the White House to meet with President Obama, and the next day, the 24th, he'll be doing something no Pope has ever done, which is addressing the Congress. And then the 25th marks a certain date. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard about the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, saying that we had 500 days to avoid climate chaos, and that would, the 500 days would be up on the September the 25th. And then you've got the Pope addressing the UN on the 27th, and CERN, which is this Hadron Collider looking for the God particle, is going to be pumped up to max in September. And the last time they pumped up to max, we had the Nepal earthquakes, and we've also got the end of the, what they call the Shemitah year, which is the Jewish year of rest prescribed in the book of Leviticus. And the last two Shemitah years, when it ended, 2001, the Dow plunged, let me just check here, 684 points. In 2008, September, it was 777 points. So people are looking at the potential for economic collapse and other things. Just a lot of things happening. But on top of that, Clay, you've had Hollywood and a lot of recent movies dropping hints about September the 23rd, 2015, a little, too much to be coincidental, and I'll just make one more comment on that. Person that the 911 Truth Movement had me look at some of these Hollywood clips, and after that, you'll recall we had this big Amtrak crash, and as far as I'm concerned, a lot of these crashes are hacks. I've posted this on before, but it's right from 60 Minutes. DARPA can take out any car by remote control. They can take out the brakes. They can make you crash. And we've had a number of suspicious plane crashes, like the German Wings, which Phil McConnell says that was definitely an electronic hijack. Well, if you can electronically hijack a car or a plane, you can certainly hijack an electronically controlled train. And what the person told me was that the Amtrak crashed at 9:23, and I said, I got to check that. So I did, and sure enough, the cameras that caught it, the timestamp is 9:23, and that tells me that they mean business. There's something going to happen in September. I don't know what it is, but it does look like they're planning something sinister. They are dropping the hints, and they did drop hints before on 911. 911 did happen. They could be they're just trying to psych us out and immobilize us through fear, that kind of thing. But I think it's worth certainly being cautiously prepared and awake for the potential of something major happening this month.
Well, you talk about climate change, and I'm not buying into that in its entirety. However, on your website, you've got videos posted of hailstorms in Mexico, 4 feet of hail. Something's happening there. Is that weather control? We've had floods here in Texas.
That was just yesterday, and of course we've seen. Well, there's a big website, geoengineeringwatch.org, that has a lot of information on weather control. But we've seen, and there's no denying the fact that we've seen just phenomenal weather taking place. The changes since for about the last 10 years. You go back to the Katrina and the tsunami of 2004. We've seen Haiti and Fukushima, and seen if you just look at tornadoes in the early 50s, America was having about 200 or 300 tornadoes a year. That's well over 1,000 now. And everybody knows about the California drought, and we've had reports of course, we've got these massive wildfires going on. And in Washington State, we've had record temperatures in the 90s, I understand, in Alaska. We've had the people dying from this drought in India not that long ago. We've had these massive, what they say, there's 3 hurricanes in the Pacific right now, and that this hasn't happened before. Now, I live in the Northeast. We had record snowfall last winter. We had about 7 feet in just a few weeks of snowfall, and people say that this was engineered snowfall. So yeah, they're definitely messing with the weather. They know that if they wipe people out with a weather event, if you take out a town with a tornado, when you take out a town with a bomb, people say, who dropped the bomb? Take it out with a tornado, they'll say it's an act of God. So they've got a part of their agenda for their world control is population control. They want a smaller population to control. So and that's certainly at the top of their list. And that goes back to Zbigniew Brzezinski writing a book in 1970 called Between Two Ages. And in that book, he talked about how you could take out a nation through storms and artificial droughts. So this technology definitely exists. It goes back for years, and I still think that's part of it. And, you know, I was wondering, you could tell me more about what's been going on in Texas, but when Texas was getting that massive flooding, we were wondering if that had to do anything with your governor, Greg Abbott, saying he was going to have the National Guard monitor Jade Helm, and of course he also signed this bill that Texas can have its own gold bullion depository.
We can take back almost $1 billion worth of gold if they can build a vault that'll hold it. And you know that's got to upset the banksters. So yeah, I think, and the other thing is, and I may be a prime example. I traveled all over the country with the presidential candidate back in 1996, and at one airport I went through, I believe it was in Dallas, there was a poster on the wall, and I thought somebody had taken my picture. You know, it was a 6'4" tall, 6'4" tall Texan with a cowboy hat, and you know, it looked just like me. And what I've done here with the magazine and this radio show, obviously I'm not getting on my knees for no one, and I'm real hard to kill, and there's a hell of a lot more of people just like me in Texas here, and we still got our guns. And we ain't giving them up. And you know, I came up with a plan 15 years ago when I had property in Texas called Liberty Villages, and I had about 5 acres, and I wanted people to come out there and put up a low-cost structure, trailer, teepee, cabin, plant food, plant a garden, and put some solar there. I figured if you got your own power source and you can grow your own food, then you don't need the government or the banksters for nothing. Well, that's certainly after I proposed that, I was involved in an accident. And I've speculated that perhaps they were more upset about that than they were just my radio show or news reporting. And then that's it. Maybe beg your pardon, go ahead.
Oh, no, very, very possible, because that's a solution that it was limited to one town, they might not worry, but if it caught on and people started doing that across the country, that could definitely be a threat, because again, they're all about consolidation of power, and independence is something that then definitely is contradictory to their goal, their aim of power and control.
That's right. And you know, I just put up on Facebook and talked about it on my show yesterday or the day before. There's a black guy named Ron Finley, I believe is his name, from South LA, and he got a video out. I put it up on my Facebook site, Free American 69, and he showed a picture. This is, you know, South LA, you know, fast foods, you know, vacant lots. And what he did is started gardens in these vacant lots, and pointed out that there's more vacant lots in LA than Central Park. So if we all work together, now this is the key, this is really the key, this is what I found in the Liberty Village concept, where we just can't come out there, Clay. We can't do that, we can't do this, we can't do this. If we could work together, we've already got Liberty Villages. They're small towns all across Texas, all across America. They're small towns. I had a woman call me from Florida, and she said, Clay, you know, we've already got that. I said, what, you got a Liberty Village? She said, yeah. Yeah, I live in this little town in North Florida, and there's farmers all around us, and we come into town every weekend, and We get our food, and we trade, and we talk, and we've already got the Liberty Village. I said, well, more power to you. God bless you, you know. I think that's what we need. But, again, they use the psychology, divide and conquer. Go to that Walmart, go to that H-E-B, go to that grocery store, you know, rather than go out and get down in the dirt. And Ron Finley, said growing your own food is like printing your own money.
They're both commodities, yeah.
Yeah, and I believe that, and you know, I dwell on that almost every day. How do we do this? How do we turn this around? How do we fix this? How do we make this work? And I don't know that I've got all the answers, but I think we've got a few. And because they're really, go ahead. People are just kind of overwhelmed with, well, we can't fight the bank, we can't fight the system, you can't fight City Hall, and I don't believe that.
Well, you've just proven that by coming up with a solution, as this guy, Ron Finley, who I hadn't heard of before, has proposed. Take the vacant lots that their economic destruction has created and use it to grow food, because definitely one of their plans would be to cut off the food supply. That creates, number one, population control, reduces the population, but number two, forces you to be dependent upon FEMA for your food supply, which means you have to do what they say in order to get that food. So again, as we were saying before, anything that makes you more independent of the government is putting a roadblock in the way of their plans.
He says L.A., South L.A. South L.A. is the land of drive-throughs and drive-bys. And more people are killed from the drive-throughs than are killed by the drive-bys. I mean, and you know, for any of those people out there that are calling me a racist, I tell you, this black guy, he said, I just got tired of seeing the people around me suffering from the food they're eating. The food they are eating. Yeah, you go into McDonald's, with the obesity rate in South LA is 2 or 3 times that of Beverly Hills. And he said, not only that, I got tired of having to drive 45 miles to get an apple that wasn't contaminated by Monsanto. You talk about Monsanto, you got Monsanto in your book, you got this genetically modified crap they want to stuff down us.
I have references to it. I haven't got a full blog post on it. There's so much good material already on it, but that is definitely part of their plan. You know, we've seen it across the boards, this whole plan of transhumanism, you know, what you see with Caitlyn Jenner, you know, that's transgenderism, of course, but they're also experimenting with I've got an article, it's called Making Sense of the Supernatural, talks about how they're actually trying to change the human race, much as the Bible suggests, in the book of Enoch suggests they did before the great flood hit the earth. They were changing the human race. They had giants in those days, according to the Bible. We even see evidence of that archaeologically, of giants at one time existing. But right now they're doing experiments where they have glow-in-the-dark cats. They're taking human genes and putting them into animals. They're messing with the human race, and they're also doing that on the food side, messing with the food. Now God knew what he was doing when he created food. He gave us the right kind of food, and processed food is part of changing that, but maybe even more threatening to that is the way Monsanto and other mega agri-corporations are changing the seeds themselves, which is extremely dangerous, because eventually you might see a scenario where the original seeds were wiped out. We have nothing left but these altered crops, and if it turns out that they're lethal and you've wiped out the originals, maybe it's too late to go back. So there's a lot of attention on changing sex, changing the human race, changing the food, remaking the world in a way that God didn't design it. It's all very dangerous, it's all very satanic, and all very much points towards our destruction.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You know, this satanic thing is, I think it's very real. I think that's there's something behind that, and that would kind of lead us into this whole Darwinism thing. Darwin was another false flag, I think. And I'm sorry, I just don't see my ancestors being a monkey out there, an ape, or even a Neanderthal. I think my ancestors probably fought with the Neanderthals as the Cro-Magnon man. But I know it's an aside, but it's another one of your books. You wanna talk a little bit about Darwinism?
Absolutely.
Is there a purpose
yeah.
Is there a purpose behind that? I'll cut you loose while I can still hear you while I warm my coffee up.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to reach over and see if I can pull up a quote from Darwin, where he talked about the purpose of his work. And it's going to take me a few seconds as I flip through the pages here. But he talked about the purpose being essentially to destroy people's faith in God. And viewers will just bear with me for a moment. Here we go. He said this in a letter to his friend Charles Lyell, who was a geologist who had spent his time trying to discredit the idea of a biblical flood. Here's what Darwin said in 1873. He said, quote, "Lyell is most firmly convinced that he has shaken the faith in the deluge," meaning the biblical flood, "more efficiently by never saying a word against the Bible. I have recently read Morley's Life of Voltaire, and he insists strongly that direct attacks on Christianity, even when written with the wonderful force of Voltaire, produce little permanent effect. Real good seems only to follow the slow and silent side attacks," unquote Charles Darwin. Just to clarify, what he's saying here is that he lived in Victorian Christian culture in England, and you couldn't directly attack the Bible. So what he did was, he didn't say the Bible's wrong. He just introduced what he called a so-called scientific theory, which provided an alternative means of man's coming about. You know, he suggested that life began in a warm little pond because the right chemicals got together by chance, and then, you know, eventually this single-celled creature evolved, and, you know, eventually evolved into fish, and the fish evolved into apes, and the apes evolved into men. He claimed that there was scientific evidence to support that, and that got some of the public's attention because they had developed a strong respect for science in the 19th century. They'd seen it develop electricity, and you know, the transatlantic cable was eventually laid, and great experiments were coming about. You know, Pasteur had proven scientifically that germs could cause disease. So scientists were getting a good reputation, and all of a sudden Darwin said, "Oh, well, this is scientific too, that we came from apes," and people did not distinguish that as false science, which it was. Now, actually, I give PowerPoints on Darwinism, and it's quite easy to discredit at every step. Just for example, they still teach today that life began in, and well, Darwin says a warm little pond. They changed it to the ocean because a pond wouldn't last long enough for significant evolution. But if you take a look at it, you could never get a cell created by chance. Darwin thought cells were simple. He didn't know about DNA. It hadn't been discovered yet. But now we know that a single cell would fill millions of pages of the Encyclopedia Britannica with the information it's got. You know, you've got thousands of different proteins, even in a bacterial cell, and each one is founded on amino acids, hundreds of them, which have to be in exact order. And this first cell of Darwin's, it would have to develop the capacity to ingest nutrients and expel waste before it died in one lifetime. And before its lifetime was up, it would have had to develop and perfect the cellular reproduction, or there wouldn't have been a second cell. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's impossible, yet they still teach that as if it were true. And you could take the next step, which is, okay, how did a bacterium get to be a fish which turned into a human being? Because our gene pool is so much different from that of a bacterium or a fish. Well, they said it was mutations, finally. They said the genes mutated. Well, now we know that mutations always cause cells to deteriorate. They never create new organs or new information. They give you, what do they cause in human beings? They call it sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, Down syndrome, and thousands of other genetic diseases. They don't build things up, they tear things down. Just to give you one more example of how Darwinism is scientifically not true, they claim that we went from a bacterium to an invertebrate like a jellyfish to a fish to a land creature like an amphibian like a frog to a reptile to a mammal to a man, right? Well, if you take a look at the world around you, you'll find that there's hundreds of thousands of species in all these categories of bacteria, invertebrate, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. But how many species are there in between? Not one. Not a single species in between. They don't exist. So the Darwinists have to fall back on the argument that they all became extinct. Now, that's just a sampling, and you can find more of this in my books, The Case Against Darwin, and the big one is called Tornado in a Junkyard, The Relentless Myth of Darwinism. But scientifically, it doesn't stand up. The purpose of Darwinism was to shake up people's faith in God, think, you know, it's just a material world, and we all came about by materialistic processes. And what that did, Clay, was by destroying people's faith in God and making them think that there was no God, that served to discredit the idea of the Bible, the Bible story of creation. And if the Bible's false, well, then the Ten Commandments are false. And we don't have to worry what it says about do not kill and do not steal and do not lie, because that was just an old myth created by some superstitious culture. That's how Darwinism played into it. It provided the quote-unquote scientific rationale as an alternative to God. That's what it was all about.
Well, you know, I certainly believe in God because my life has been, I ought to be dead if something hadn't been watching over me. And and I think you touch on this. Let's talk about extraterrestrial. They got in this in the Global Federation that David likes to talk about. You know, I say, you know, if somebody is from another planet, I want to see some ID. But I've had archaeologists on my show that have done a lot of research, and I've done a lot of research. We've had civilizations that go back 100,000 years, well preceding the Bible, but the Bible is an excellent history book and an excellent guide. It's you know, if we use it properly, I think it's I don't buy into the religions, because you got people like John Hagee out there that want you to just send money so he can forward that to Israel. I don't necessarily buy into the whole Israeli being the chosen people. I just had Eli James talking about Christian identity on yesterday. But I've written articles, or written actually novels, about global or interstellar civilizations, and the pyramids on Earth. We can't build them today. So where did they come from? And the fact down in Peru, you've got art that you can only see from about 6,000 feet. You know, why is that? How was that done? You know, so I think there's more to it. We don't have to be the only ones out there, in my opinion. How about yours, sir?
Well, I have an article on my website called Making Sense of the Supernatural, and it does talk about visitations on Earth, by what were called the Watchers, or the fallen angels, and there are people like Lee Marzulli and Steve Quayle and Tom Horn who have done a great deal of work on this. I have not. I just sort of actually kind of a recent area of discovery for me. But the Bible says, and it came to pass when men, this is from Genesis 6, it says, right before the flood, it says, and it came to pass when men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. And what a lot of people have started to realize, and this is really supplemented by the book of Enoch, which describes this in detail, this relationship between the angels and men. Of course, we'll say, well, could angels really have sex with a woman? And apparently they could. Apparently they do have DNA. And if you look at the Greek mythology, it talks about these mighty men, right, like Hercules. And of course, the Bible talks about giants like Goliath is probably the most famous example. But even before that, before the flood, it talked about giants were much larger. And now we've got a great many examples of giants that have been dug up in the earth, which were suppressed by the Smithsonian. There's a book called The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America, The Missing Skeletons, and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up. It's by a guy named Richard Dewhurst, very distinguished author. He's, I believe, an Emmy Award-winning writer. But there's no question about the fact that this evidence of these ancient civilizations, apparently, I was talking earlier about transhumanism. Apparently that's one thing God didn't like. He didn't want the mixing of fallen satanic angels with mankind, which was what was happening in those days. But there's absolutely no question that many of these skeletons of giants have been found, a lot of them having 6 fingers and 6 toes, which is also mentioned in the Bible, the 6-fingered, 6-toed giant. And those have mostly probably been destroyed by the Smithsonian, partly in support of Darwinism, and to remove this idea that we actually had this pre-flood civilization. Again, if people don't believe that there was a flood of Noah, there's more than 200 cultures, including the American Indians and the ancient Greeks, who spoke of a worldwide flood. So these things did happen. No question about the fact that we have been visited. I don't think that we have Star Wars type. There's been a lot of movies about aliens from superior civilizations, and what a lot of people actually think, Clay, is that the fallen angels are going to come back, and that what they'll do is they'll claim that they're these Star Wars superior civilizations, and if we just listen to them and do their bidding, that all will be well and peaceful here on the earth. But in fact, they would be bringing the same type of evil that they brought pre-flood. At least that's the perspective that I've developed. I know that, of course, there's a lot of UFOologists who would have a different view on it, but that would just be my own take.
Well, I got to mention here, this is what I plan to be working on for the next few months. I wrote this 45 years ago, and this is just the cover. I'm just going to touch on the cover. Thousands of years ago, the earth was a different place. A race existed like no other. Theirs was a technology far ahead of the levels we know of today. They faced a disaster similar to that which killed the dinosaurs. They sent their people out into space. Only a few brave souls stayed to help less advanced inhabitants of the planet rebuild. They were genetically advanced men, almost immortal, incredibly powerful, telepathic, and able to manipulate matter with their minds. They were known as gods, angels, warriors, and demons. Among the survivors of our planet's close encounter with a galactic intruder. The legends and names of these beings are scattered throughout our history. Their power grew all-pervasive and hidden throughout modern times. Humanity was divided, conquered, and controlled by unseen hands. Today, the balance of power shifted into the hands of the most feared being in history. Meet Lucifer. I just came to the conclusion that I am going to finish that book, and I'm going to write science fiction. I don't say this is real. I don't say this is the way it happened. But I do say it could have happened this way.
By the way, it's I should just wanted to ask. It's 11 o'clock. Are we coming up on a break? I just wanted to.
Yes, sir. You can take a break. I will. I'll do a commercial. You got actually no. I will. I won't do a commercial. I will do something from your website that I think people ought to see. So yes, you can go ahead and take a break.
Okay, I'll return in about 2.
Okay. All right.
I'll be back.
Let me get this up, folks. This is okay. Where are we here? Okay. Truth? We ain't got no truth. We don't need no truth. Let's see. This is correspondent Ken Herman questions Bush on government-created news clips. Let me see if we can get that up.
Hearts and good nature. Yeah, Ken.
Mr. President, earlier this year you told us you had ordered your administration to cease and desist on payments to journalists to promote your agenda. You cited the need for ethical concerns and the need for a bright line between the press and the government. Your administration continues to make the use of video news releases, which are prepackaged news stories sent to television stations, fully aware that some or many of these stations will air them without any disclaimer that they are produced by the government. Comptroller General of the United States this week said that raises ethical questions. Does it raise ethical questions about the use of government money to produce stories about the government that wind up being aired with no disclosure that they were produced by the government?
There's a Justice Department opinion that says these pieces are within the law so long as they're based upon facts, not advocacy. And I expect our agencies to adhere to that ruling, to that Justice Department opinion. This has been a long-standing practice of the federal government to use these types of videos. The Agricultural Department, as I understand, has been using these videos for a long period of time. The Defense Department, other departments have been doing so. It's important that they be based upon the guidelines set out by the Justice Department. Now, I think it'd be helpful if local stations then disclose to their viewers if that's, that this was based upon a factual report and they chose to use it. But evidently in some cases that's not the case. So anyway.
To guarantee that's happening by including that language in the prepackaged report.
Yeah, I don't, oh, you mean a disclosure on George W. Bush and I?
Well, some way to make sure it couldn't air without the disclosure that you believe is so vital.
Ken, I mean, there's a procedure that we're going to follow, and the local stations ought to, if there's a deep concern about that, ought to tell their viewers what they're watching.
All right, these clips are up and James's website, and let's see if we can find somebody that makes a little bit of sense. Here's Alan Grayson on the worst deal since Manhattan was sold for $24. And when you're ready to come back there, James.
I'm back on. I'm back here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm back. Thanks for the break.
Yeah, I'll put this on hold when it stops.
Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I've received over 500 emails from my constituents concerning this hearing. Let me read 2 of them to you. Barbara Rufo of Winter Garden writes, "One executive bonus could build 1 school. Imagine what all that bonus money could do." Frank Krasuski of Orlando writes, "Put them all in jail," which is where I would be if I robbed a financial institution. I'd like to go back to...
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. You know, when one of the last things George Bush did was give $2 trillion to the banksters who printed the money. Now, why would we give the money to the banksters and write it off and then charge the people, charge the United States interest on that money that we gave back to them? I don't know. That just somehow that just doesn't make sense to me. And the fact is, if we had given that money, if the Congress had given that $2 trillion to the American people could have paid off every home in America, turned around and given the money back to the bankers, paid off all of their homes, and all it takes is a simple bill to, because this money that we're paying interest on was our money to begin with, wasn't it? Am I missing something here? I don't know. I mean, this is insanity to me. I'll ask my psychiatrist. I think I got an appointment this morning with a psychiatrist. I'll ask her about that.
Well, I think you'd have more answers than the psychiatrist would. But you're right. That clip is in a recent post they did called "The Good Guys Take on the Bad Guys," and what I wrote was I used the word post advisedly because it's a lot of YouTube clips that I simply collated together. But Alan Grayson was a marvelous one at seeing through the semantics of the bankers, and he took on Ben Bernanke and tracked him down, and he demonstrated that the Fed had done, I think it was $9 trillion in off-balance sheet transactions, that they were playing the market, shorting the price of gold. None of this is legal. None of this is constitutional, you know. And you're absolutely right. The Federal Reserve was created, it was a copy of the Rothschild central banks of Europe. What it does, it creates money from nothing. That money is taken by the government and given out to these banks and multinational corporations. And by creating money from nothing, they devalue the dollar. That's why the dollar has lost 98% of its value since the Fed was created in 1913. Now, in my book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, I do have a graph which demonstrates that there was zero net inflation in America between the days of the Pilgrims and the start of the Federal Reserve. That's 250 years. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that there was never a time of inflation during the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, and Civil War. The government did print money in order to finance those wars. That did create a temporary period of inflation, but after those wars, money went back to its normal value, so that if you bought a pair of shoes in 1905, it probably would cost you the same as it cost George Washington in 1770. But the problem is that after they create the Fed, and the graph clearly shows this, inflation just takes off like a skyrocket. That's because they are continuously printing money out of nothing. This is for their benefit, not ours. This is how they finance wars. The bankers are very well aware of the fact that if they finance a war by raising taxes, people will squawk about their increased taxes. Now, they have boiled the frog and gradually increased the income tax over the years, but not as much as they would need to do to finance these wars. So they covertly finance wars and other enterprises by creating money from nothing, which creates inflation, which is a hidden tax. That's why your prices are going up, is because of the Fed devaluing the dollar. They create trillions of dollars, which goes into these multinational banks and corporations, and you feel it in the increased price at the grocery store, and our tendency is to blame the local grocery store and say, why did you guys jack up your prices? But it's not the local grocery store that is the problem. The problem is the banksters and the Fed and the government creating money from nothing and devaluing the dollar.
You know, speaking of grocery stores, you know, and earlier I said we really had all the answers. Well, in 6 states, we've got answers to more than one problem. We've got We've got the answer to the whole GMO scam that Monsanto's putting on. There are 6 states that has bright farms, and what they are doing is putting greenhouses on the roof of their supermarkets or the parking lots of their supermarkets, and the food that you get, the vegetables that you get in that supermarket was picked that day. There ain't no transportation cost, there ain't no gasoline cost. You cut out Rockefeller, you cut out the banks, you don't have to borrow the money, and it's like Ron Finley said, growing your own food is like printing your own money.
That sounds wonderful. That's a great approach, and I always feel encouraged when I see people using their God-given initiative to go about and counteract these evils, and that's also a credit to the truth movement that people have been, through alternative media, people are waking up. You're certainly not going to hear about ideas like that on CNN, but I'm certainly glad to see that something concrete proactively is being done to, it not only is good for people, it actually is honoring God, because it's actually preserving His original creation. One thing I didn't mention, we were talking about fallen angels and aliens and the flood. One reason God brought that flood upon the earth is because people were doing the same thing then as they're doing now. They were changing His creation. They were changing the food. You had these, they were changing the species, and that's in the book of Jasher. They're actually experimenting with changing the species, and you see these old Greek statues of a centaur, a man who's half human and half horse. You know, that may not be mythology. They were really monkeying with God's creation, and that's one reason why He had to, basically the flood that the Bible describes, He had to reboot the planet and start over again, otherwise the creation was going to go completely to hell. And that's what we're seeing the beginnings of now. But I'm very, very happy to hear these reports about people taking local measures to preserve natural food that people can eat.
Well, and this comes from a black guy in South LA. I mean, and he's articulate. He's articulate. No dummy here. No, he is. Matter of fact, he may approach brilliant. It's Ron Finley. I highly recommend you do a search. South LA, Ron Finley, vacant lots. It's just incredible. And you know, it's back to we've just got to get back to. It's self-sufficiency. It's taking care of yourself, taking care of your neighbors. The Amish have always been good at that. It's let me take a look at your site here. Do you have another direction that you want to go in? Is there something here that you want to talk about?
Well, a lot of my focus has been on the history of false flags, and actually our film Shadow Ring starts out with sort of a history of false flags, the sinking of the Maine, the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, which was not a classic false flag, but certainly they knew about it before it happened. Of course, Tonkin Gulf and the Vietnam War and the non-existent weapons of mass destruction. So I focus on that a lot, but there's all kinds of false flags, and it seems like we're seeing them right now in the media. I have piece there on the Charleston alleged shooting, and there were all kinds of, speaking of flags, red flags about the Charleston shooting. We saw that, I credit Red Silver J. I don't know if you're familiar with his work on YouTube. He does a lot of debunking of the news headlines. He's also an Afro-American gentleman, does a great job, but he showed that the 24 hours after the Charleston shooting, you already had families giving news conferences, no tears, saying they're full of love and smiling. And, you know, I understand about Christian love and forgiveness, but usually people have to go through a grieving process if your mother's just been bullet-ridden. And the very next day, and we're talking 48 hours after the Charleston shooting, the Justice Department announced it was giving $29 million of taxpayer money to the families. Now, 9 families, that's over $3 million each. Plus, they're getting money from Boeing, the Carolina Panthers, and money pouring into the church website. So those families, I imagine, can pretty much retire. They're all millionaires now. And then 4 days after the Charleston shooting, the church reopened for services. And I'm thinking, you know, this is a massacre. 9 people dead. You've got blood and body tissue all over the church, and you've already cleaned up, and it wasn't a crime scene. Wouldn't it be closed off? But Obama's going down there to do a photo op and sing Amazing Grace on there. And, you know, what came out of it, of course, that they took down the Confederate flag, and they got all kinds of mileage out. And, of course, they increased calls for gun control. And the most recent one is this Virginia cameraman and news commentator, and that one has already fallen apart. The father of the woman, it turns out, is a professional actor. He was in Les Miserables, and there's TV commercials of him. He's a professional actor, and he's on TV, no tears, but he's calling for gun control right after it happened. He said, you know, her life must not be in vain. We must, you know, have new gun regulations. And so there seems to be just this epidemic of events. Another one with the Chattanooga, they happen so fast, Clay, that you forget about them almost. They happen so fast. But the Chattanooga attacks on the recruiting centers, now I haven't really had time to vet this and verify it, but there's video up on YouTube that says that those guys who allegedly shot down at the recruiting centers, those were guys who already died in Iraq, and they show the pictures, and the names are identical to casualties of Iraq. These guys were already dead, according at least to this YouTube upload. So it looks like they're just coming after the guns right now. That seems to be really high priority, and that suggests to me that if they're coming after the guns, what they're hoping is that on the tail end of whenever they get draconian drug measures enacted, that's when you'd see martial law moving in.
What about this school that, according to a lot of reports, was already vacant, and there were no students killed?
Of course, James Tracy at Memory Hole blog has done he's a college professor, who's done a great deal of work on that, and I know Wolfgang Halbig has investigated that the Sandy Hook to a great deal. And I want to mention there is some controversy within the truth movement. I know that American Free Press thinks that it was a real event, and some people think that it was that some of these shootings are real and that they come about through people who are MK Ultra'd or have been on psychiatric medications, things of that nature. There is controversy still about some of these events, but some of them for sure are definitely false flags, definitely fictionalized, because they've realized they can accomplish a lot more through theater than actually having to go to the trouble of killing people and arranging all of that. It's much easier just to especially with the technology today, they can just hire Hollywood to, if you've ever seen the movie Wag the Dog, it was a very realistic comedy about how the President of the United States hires Hollywood to create a phony war right before the election to distract the public from a sex scandal that he's involved in. And there's no doubt in my mind that this kind of thing is going on, the theater to deceive the public.
By the way, for your information, probably can't use this, and the main player in this is probably dead by now, but I met a gentleman that was on stationed at Pearl Harbor. And I believe he was in the Marines. They told him, they told his squad the day before to turn in their ammunition. His squad didn't. So when the planes came over, they shot one down, and it crashed on the roof of the barracks. And Eden Ramey went on top of the barracks, pulled the pilot out, and found a map in his pocket. The map had the location of every ship at Pearl Harbor with one exception. The aircraft carrier was where the Arizona was. And they ordered them to turn it all in, turn it in. Whoever found the whatever was in the plane, whatever they'd found on this aircraft, turn it in, or they would keep the base locked down. So Eden Ramey went and turned it in.
Well, what you just said is directly ties to the false flag and the planning that went into Pearl Harbor. That map, as you mentioned, and I had not heard of this man or this map before, but it had the exact locations of ships and dock. Now, here's what's important to know. Roosevelt in Washington knew about this attack, and they were reading all of Japan's diplomatic messages. We had cracked their code, which is called the Purple Code, and when we deciphered their messages, we called it magic, and the copies of magic always went to the president and to the Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, the Secretary of State. People in Washington got it, but they did not go to the commanders in Hawaii, General Walter C. Short of the Army and Admiral Husband Kimmel, who were ultimately scapegoated for the casualties and for supposedly being ill-prepared for the attack. But here's the thing. Washington knew that Honolulu, the spies in Honolulu, the Japanese spies, had been told to tell Tokyo the precise locations of our ships in dock. And they were, as December the 7th, 1941 approached, they were ordered to step up the frequency of these reports. They wanted to know exactly where each ship was located. The only implication of this could be that those ships had been targeted for attack. Now, Roosevelt knew it, the War Department knew it, and the Navy Department knew it in Washington, but no message was sent to Hawaii saying the spies there are reporting to Tokyo the exact locations of your ships and dock. They wanted this to happen, and if people go to my website, jamesperloff.com, I have a post there. Look under articles. It's called Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt's 911, which details the foreknowledge of the attack, how they knew about it. It wasn't just decoded diplomatic intercepts. We also we cracked their naval code as well, and Robert Stinnett covers that in his book, Day of Deceit, the truth about FDR and Pearl Harbor. And also, many personal warnings were received from various sources, including J. Edgar Hoover told the president, Martin Dies, a congressman, had received information about the attack, which he shared with the president. The president said, pass it on to nobody else. The Dutch had learned about the attack. They had their Dutch naval attaché warn Washington. There were so many personal warnings that were given to Washington, which were not shared with our men in Hawaii who were set up as sitting ducks. I'll say just one more thing about this. We're on a different topics today, but they're all relevant to the pattern of events that led to where we are today. A lot of people never ask the question, why was the fleet in Pearl Harbor in the first place? The reason it was there is because President Roosevelt ordered it to go there. This was completely contrary to naval advice. You know, we normally kept the Pacific Fleet on the West Coast around San Diego. And there were many reasons not to put the fleet in Pearl Harbor. They didn't have adequate dry docks. They were boxed in like sardines, making them ideal targets for bombers. And you can be attacked in Pearl Harbor from 360 degrees because all the waters around Hawaii are uninhabited. Also, you had to provide transport and fuel over 2,000 miles of the Pacific. All of your sailors were separated from their families. It just didn't make any sense. And so the fleet commander in 1940 was Admiral J.L. Richardson. He was enraged by this decision by Roosevelt. He flew to Washington, sat down with the president, laid out this litany of reasons why the fleet should not be based there. And Roosevelt said, well, it'll deter Japanese aggression. Well, guess what, Clay? As of December the 7th, 1941, everyone knew that putting the fleet at Pearl Harbor did not deter Japanese aggression. But the president was never held accountable. He was not held accountable for the decision to put the fleet in Pearl Harbor, nor was he held accountable for all the foreknowledge he had, which he withheld from the military. Instead, the Navy and Army commanders were scapegoated. And they fought back, by the way. You just read Admiral Kimmel's story, published in 1955, or Rear Admiral Theobald's book, The Final Secret of Pearl Harbor, published in 1954 by small presses, by the way. This is the alternative media back in the 1950s, was the small publishing house. They had no internet back then, but they tried to tell the people the truth. But this has been going on for a long, long time.
Who was the commander of the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk? He didn't bring it in. That's why the Arizona was docked there.
Well, it's my understanding that they want to sacrifice these older battleships because, actually, look at the history of World War II. The United States very rarely used a battleship. We mostly used faster cruisers and aircraft carriers. They wanted the aircraft carriers out of there, as I understand it, because they wanted to preserve. They did want to win this war, but they wanted to sacrifice an expendable part of the fleet, and that included these older battleships. So it's my understanding they took the aircraft carriers out, there was more than one, prior to the attack to get them out of the way. But that also, by the way, also left Pearl Harbor more undefended because you did not have these the availability of aircraft-based fighters which could have helped repel the attack.
Now, this took place, Pearl Harbor took place, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, shortly after Roosevelt, and I believe that was in 1933, basically made all of us slaves to the bankers, signed us off. Are you familiar with that piece of legislation that he signed?
Yes, one of the first things he did in 1933, besides recognizing the Soviet Union and the Bolsheviks, was to make everybody turn in their gold. He made owning gold illegal, even though it had been legal tender for many years. And then after everybody turned in the gold, they virtually doubled the price of gold, yes. Which certainly profited some central bankers. But yes, that was one of his first acts, and he was, as much as they tried to portray him as a man of the people, he was as much under the control of the Wall Street banksters as the Republicans were.
Yes, he was. As a matter of fact, I just put that in my latest article. I think I got that up on Facebook. I said, you know, as I lay awake last night wondering why I was not getting the support I need to continue, realization came over me that I was doing nothing wrong except following Christ. I'm doing nothing wrong. You are. And I talked about the whole this whole thing. Our family gave away our gold. Let them take it. Somehow just let them take our gold. It was incredible to me. It was just incredible. Looking back, and they will try to do it again. They will try to do it again. I said, like your parents and grandparents before you, you've been deceived by the liars, and your Messiah tried to warn you about it. And if you don't know, if you don't want to believe me, try believing Jesus, who said, talked about, you are of your father, the devil. That's the bankers. I don't care who their grandmother slept with. I don't care, you know. I care about what's happening today, and the work that you're doing is just as important as can be. I mean, I intend to, with your permission, I intend to put a few, some of your articles back in my next issue of the Free American magazine. They tried to kill me. I tried to bring it back out. I failed at that, but you know, didn't have the money to pay for William Randolph Hearst for the paper, and didn't have the money to deliver the tons of printed magazines to via the post office or UPS and pay Rockefeller for the gasoline, and didn't want to give DuPont all the money for the ink. So thank God we got thank God we got the internet, huh?
Well, it's been a marvelous tool, and without it, I certainly could not have done the work I have. And when I wrote The Shadows of Power, there was no internet, and everything back then had to be done in a library. I was kind of fortunate. You know, I worked for a couple of years in the John Birch Society's research department. This go back to the mid-1980s, and they had a library of information there, as well as alphabetized files of subject matter. And so I was able to get hold of some pretty rare books at that time. Nonetheless, without the internet today, which is so amazing that you can actually just go onto a search engine and instantly find information that years ago you would have to travel maybe, 20 miles to a library in the hopes that it had a particular book you were looking for, and they didn't have it. Maybe you could get it on interlibrary loan, but maybe you have to wait 3 weeks for it to come in, and you couldn't get the instant information you can today, and that's really helped us. I know that the enemy uses the speed of the internet for its own purposes, for surveillance and information gathering on people that it doesn't like. But it certainly worked in our favor, and I think that it's worked in our favor more than they anticipated, because they looked on us as these dumb cattle who they thought we just used the internet probably to, you know, go shopping and share things, pictures on Facebook, which people do, but they didn't really count on people using their brains to gather material and think with it and share it the way they have. And so you've got people who are taking action, like Ron Finley, who you mentioned, and others around the world. There's just this tremendous truth movement that's sprouted up. It's multinational, and the great power that we have, besides being foremost, is our alliance with God. We serve a God of truth, but truth is something we have on our side. I always like to say this, but you know, the bankers have got money, but we've got truth, and you know, I'll put my I'll put my bet on the truth over the money powers anytime.
Let me. I went on a show up in Canada, and he brought on another guest, and I mentioned one thing. I mentioned the protocols of the elders of Zion, and got from this other guest, I got the same kind of reaction. I asked him, I said, "Are you Jewish?" He says, no, I'm not Jewish. Okay, but his reaction was so vehement that I have my doubts about that. But as Henry Ford said, you know, as far as the protocols are, it's what is happening. And I've told people, you know, doesn't matter who wrote it, it matters who is using that today. If it's the banksters, if it's the Jews, if it's the Jesuits, you know, doesn't really, maybe it's a mixture of all of them. I'd like to get your opinion on that, because it's I have read it, and I put it up on my website, and it's pretty incredible, I think, that it really fits what's happening today. as far as the
You're absolutely, you're right, and you know, for years I had gone under the impression that the mass media had poured out through repetition that these were just a hoax and don't pay attention to them. But then, as I continued my studies and learned more and more things, I said to myself, well, what about the protocols? Is it just possible that they call them a hoax because they don't want us to look at them? So I actually looked at them, and I found something in the second chapter, which is Protocols 2, which really grabbed me because I've written 2 books on Darwinism, which we were talking about earlier. And here's what it says. It says, quote, "We persuaded them to accept as the dictates of science theory. It is with this object in view that we are constantly, by means of our press, arousing a blind confidence in these theories. Do not suppose for a moment that these statements are empty words. Think carefully of the successes we arranged for Darwinism," unquote. And, you know, having written on Darwin, I knew that he lived a very wealthy lifestyle, even though he didn't work. You know, he didn't work since he was a young man on the ship Beagle. Yet he lived on an estate with as many as 8 servants, and he didn't make that much money off his Darwin books. But as I investigated his history, it turns out he made a fortune in the stock market. In fact, his biographer said that later in life he made 34 investments, and all 34 paid off. And I'm thinking, you know, not when Warren Buffett scores 100%. He had some help there. So they did arrange some success for Darwinism, I think. But if you look through the protocols, I found stunning things. It calls for world government. It says they want to, quote, "absorb all the states' forces in the world and to form a super government," unquote. That's Protocol 511. But this one really grabbed me because supposedly this was created by the Tsar's police in Russia in order to create hatred of the Jews in Russia, right? And by the way, I'm half Jewish. My father was a Russian Jew. The name was Perloff in Russia. They migrated to America in 1904. Anyway, here's what it says in the Protocols, Chapter 10. It says, quote, "In the near future, we shall establish the responsibility of presidents. We shall invest the president with a right of declaring a state of war. The president will, at our discretion, interpret the sense of such of the existing laws as admit of various interpretation. He will further annul them when we indicate to him the necessity to do so. Besides this, he'll have the right to propose temporary laws and even departures in the government's constitutional working," unquote. That's Protocols Chapter 10. Now I looked at that, Clay, and I said, well, that's what Obama's doing. He's giving out these executive orders that override the Constitution. And also it said, "We shall invest the president with a right of declaring a state of war." That goes back to the days of Harry Truman when he sent troops to Korea. We had just joined the UN, so he thumbed his nose at Congress and he sent troops without even consulting the Congress. Since World War II and since we joined the UN, we have not had a declaration of war. They don't need it anymore. But I look at this and I say, well, if this was created by the Tsar's police, why are they talking about presidents? This goes beyond Russia, Imperial Russia. Here's another one, Protocols 13. It says, quote, "In order that the masses may not guess what they're about, we distract them with amusements, games, pastimes, passions. Soon we shall begin through the press to propose competition in art and sport of all kinds," unquote. Now, I look at that and I say, look how the people are distracted with video games and unending sports. You know, when I was a kid, there were 6 teams in the NHL, the National Hockey League. I think it's up to 30, right? There's this constant unending sports. And if you look at the history of it, the protocols were published in 1903. That was the year of the first World Series. That's when the professional sports were started. The National Hockey League, the National Football League, they started getting going after them. So these things are coming true. That's what Henry Ford was talking about. But if we just one more, because, I've written a chapter on the dangers of vaccines, and many people are waking up to the fact that you don't need vaccines. You've got an immune system. And most of these diseases like polio, which they credit to vaccines, were already simply naturally dying a natural death before they introduced the vaccines. But it says in Protocol 1019, it says, quote, "It is indispensable to trouble the peoples with the inoculation of diseases," unquote. And the first time I read that, I said, well, we don't inoculate people with diseases. And then about 2 years later, when I started studying the ill effects of vaccines and how they create autoimmune diseases, and and sudden infant death syndrome and autism and a host of other things that didn't used to be around. I looked at that and I said, oh my goodness, that's what they were talking about when they said the inoculation of diseases. Because a vaccine, what you do is you take the disease itself, which you should try to avoid at all costs, and they inject it into you. They weaken it, quote unquote. And then they add to that weakened disease, they add animal protein that they cultured the virus in, plus aluminum, mercury, formaldehyde, and a bunch of other junk, and then the people wonder why you've got this this rapidly growing autism rate amongst infants. It was right there in the protocols over 100 years ago. So I look at the protocols as a blueprint for what's happened. I've seen almost nothing in them that has not come true. And so, and by the way, also in my book, I have a chapter on the protocols in my book, Prison's Lonely Warrior, which also talks about the hoax claim. The hoax claim itself was extremely flimsy. The guy just compared about a dozen passages to an old novel that had been written in the 19th century by a Frenchman named Maurice Joly, and he said the protocols were copied from that novel. To the contrary, I think Joly got it from the protocols, because the protocols had been in development for a long time.
Let me ask you about, you know, this just pops in my head on a real regular basis. I said, you know, you don't believe me, what about Jesus? Beware the Jews who say they're Jews but are not. Now we're getting DNA evidence produced by the Jews themselves that their ancestors never set foot in Palestine. They came from the Caucasus region and Khazaria. Have you looked into that?
Absolutely. And the first book I read on that was The 13th Tribe by Arthur Kessler, a noted Pulitzer Prize-winning Jewish author, and he documented that, and you can find this on Wikipedia, interesting enough, it's no secret, it's documented that in these, around the 7th or 8th century, the kingdom of Khazaria, which many people in the old world called Gog and Magog, it was north of the Black and Caspian Seas. That entire nation converted to Judaism, and one reason they did that was that at that time the people of Khazaria were being pressured by both Christians from the west and Muslims from the south to convert, and they wanted to stay independent, but at the same time they wanted to have the religious dignity of a monotheistic religion, and they actually converted the entire nation to Judaism, even though they had no biological relationship to Abraham. And the entire nation converted by decree of the king, the Kagan of Khazaria. And again, that's in Wikipedia. It's not something in some anti-Semitic book. You can easily look it up. And those people, eventually, when the Mongol tribes invaded from the east in the 12th century, they migrated into Poland and Eastern Europe and became what we call the Jews of today. Now, to be sure, there were probably genuine descendants of Abraham who mixed with them. And who's to say? You know, I never would say to anybody, you're not a real Jew, you're a Khazarian or something like that. But there certainly is evidence that, both genetic and historical, that many of the people who they call Ashkenazi Jews, who are the primary people occupying Israel today, are not biologically descended from Abraham, and therefore they have no legitimate claim. That's what Christians have bought into, unfortunately, many of them in America, is that we have to unconditionally support Israel today, no matter how many false flags it runs on us, because those are the descendants of Abraham, and we all have a Bible to them. But in reality, this is a different people, and if you look at the actions of political Israel, it has certainly been contrary to the interests of America over the years, and that's something that Christian Americans need to really critically think about, analyze, and examine the history of.
How do we oppose this? Now, this is these pretenders. You know what? I mean, the Bible even tells you, Jesus told you, beware the Jews who say they're Jews but are not, or of the synagogue of Satan. I don't know how it could get more plain than that. And then you've got James 8:44 talking about you are of your father of the devil, and you know, he was a liar from the beginning. Of course, the Mossad's the Mossad's motto is warfare by deception. Now, let me move to another subject very quickly here. I want to get your opinions on. There was somebody that tried to stop them, tried to stop the slaughter of white Christians in Russia, or tried to prevent it from moving over to Germany. What's your thought on Adolf Hitler? In all of my studies, and especially viewing the videos made of the German people cheering Hitler, he just didn't strike me as much of a dictator. Did we fight on the wrong side?
We were talking about Pearl Harbor, and my own studies have led me to this conclusion, Clay, that the reason that we started to antagonize Japan, we antagonized them with a trade embargo, which was strangling them. That trade embargo was enacted in July of 1941. Now, what happened on June 22nd, 1941? You had the invasion of Soviet Russia by Germany, and it wasn't just Germany. People don't get this. It was Finland and Italy and Romania and Hungary and Croatia. It was 6 nations attacking the communists to get rid of them. And as some people who have studied this know, it was also, you had 47,000 volunteers from Spain. You had 2 divisions from Belgium. You had Frenchmen. They wanted to get rid of communism. And, of course, Japan had signed the tripartite treaty with Italy and Germany, the Anti-Comintern Pact. They were dedicated also to the destruction of communism. And so by embargoing oil to Japan, Roosevelt was making sure that Japan would not join Operation Barbarossa and crush the Soviet Union like a vise, and they were forced to move south to try to get oil from the Dutch East Indies, and he set up Pearl Harbor as a target too tempting to resist. But as far as that war goes, yes, that war had nothing to do with world conquest. There was not a single document anywhere in any German archive indicating that they had a desire to conquer the world. They certainly didn't have the capacity to do it. And neither did Japan. Japan's smaller than the state of Montana, This had nothing to do with world conquest. It had to do with this hypocrisy of any movement by Germany or Japan was represented to the American people as acts of aggression, that any move by Stalin invading Finland or the Baltic states or invading Romania or invading Poland himself. Remember, in 1939, World War II broke out in England and France declared war on Germany because they invaded Poland. But wait a minute, that same month, Russia invaded Poland, and what do France and England do in response to that? They yawn and look the other way. There's no declaration of war on Stalin and the Soviet Union. So, yes, this war was very different than the way it was presented to the American public, and there's no question about the fact that not only did the Germans want nothing to do with a war with France and England, and not only did they attempt to end the war with England many times, and that's what Rudolf Hess' mysterious flight was about, May the 10th, 1941. The deputy Fuhrer of Germany himself flew to England to try to make peace with England because they knew in 1 month they were going to have to take on Stalin's troops. And so, yes, they were trying to crush communism and try to crush this system that had killed tens of millions of people. And ever since then, they've been maligned as the most evil people in the history of the world, and that's part of the same propaganda machine. Some people have tried to say that the Germans were actually part of the Illuminati hierarchy. I don't believe it. The Illuminati do not demonize their own the way that the Germans have been demonized. They've never let us forget about it. They've never stopped making movies about World War II. When I was a kid, they had endless movies and TV shows about World War II, Hogan's Heroes when I was a kid, and Combat, and, The Great Escape, and they still do it with Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. They never let us forget how great a war that was, but the truth was, that was a war intended to destroy communism, which, by the way, is just another face of Talmudic Judaism, which anybody studying the history of the Bolshevik Revolution knows that some 90% of the Bolshevik regime was actually Jewish. And the Gulag commandants of their slave labor camps were Jewish as well. So you know, that's in contrast to the concentration camps that they endured on the German side. But absolutely, that war was nothing like the war that's presented to us in movies and American media.
Yeah, that's the thing. We watched this happen in Germany, and I've been demonized here for trying to wake people up with shows like this, with talking about the protocols, having the links to it. Everything I've done here has been to uphold that oath that I took when I was 18 years old. It's been 50 years. And like I said, there's no expiration date on that. But I feel like I'm a soldier standing in a field, you know, waving my rifle around, and the horde just galloped past me. I don't. I've been unable to organize. Even when I had money before they tried to kill me, I was doing pretty well. I had over 2,000 subscribers. Maybe it was closer to 4,000 when there was a hard copy magazine. And since the accident, which was arranged by Jewish companies tapping my phones, I haven't been able to rebuild. I haven't been able to restart anything. And the Liberty Village concept I talked about, it's not. We don't want to. I don't believe Hitler wanted to kill any Jews. I believe he might have had work camps. I'd like to have a work camp called a farm, self-sufficient family farm, which my friend Richard Kelly Hoskins says is the foundation of every civilization. I believe him. You know, I want peaceful solutions. I want, and I think we've got them. I think everything is there in front of us. My friend Paul Pantone has a carburetor. You can put bacon fat in it, for God's sakes. You can put Pepsi in it, it'll run on it.
Even Pepsi. Who knew?
We were just talking about it yesterday. I said, will that run on algae? Because you could run a plastic tube around your property and produce algae. He said, yeah, it'll run on it. I don't want to run it. I don't want to do it, but yeah, it would run on that. So I've told people that we've had the answers probably for 100 years. We've got the answers to all this. But right now, with the control of the media the way it is, you know, people would rather watch a swimsuit model than simply go out and talk to their neighbors. Talk to their neighbors. You know, here's a flyer. How'd you like to work in this neighborhood and turn the backyard into gardens? Put solar on our roof so we don't we cut our everything down. How about that? Can we do
well, you're absolutely right. There are many positive solutions, and of course, they have suppressed technology or kept the best technology for themselves. In fact, it's interesting. William Guy Carr, who was in Canadian intelligence and one of the best analysts of the Illuminati, he wrote the book Pawns in the Game and two others. He, in his research, found them in the 19th century, the 1800s. They were talking about the magic box, and he finally figured out they had a radio. They had radio back in the 1800s. The late 1800s. You know, some 30 years before it was ascribed to Marconi and the public started to get them. They already had radios, and that's how they were able to coordinate some of the revolutions and assassinations. But their technology is ahead of us, and they will suppress technology, good technology that is positive. You know, they've got an agenda of population control. So anything that's going to be positive, that's life-giving, this contrary, as you said, their father, the devil, was a murderer from the beginning. That's right in the Gospel. So Definitely, population control goes hand in hand with that. They're going to suppress anything that's going to make life better and life to be done, undertaken. We should be doing our will the same as the will of our Father in heaven. That's from the Lord's Prayer, and so they're going to oppose anything that's good. We don't like to think of government leaders that way, but even the government leaders are merely figureheads that have been put in place through a fake electoral process, at least in the case of the nationwide presidential elections. And they're going to keep advancing that agenda. That's how they got in power in the first place. So it remains up to us just to keep doing God's will and to keep telling people the truth and doing the best we can. God understands our dilemma, and He's not going to let this evil persist forever. These people are not going to win in the end. We're dealing with a spiritual, eternal situation. They may get some temporary, temporal victories here on earth. Kind of like Jesus talked about the man who filled his barn with grain and said, I'll lay up things, and then God came to him that night and said, sorry, but your time is already up. So people like Kissinger and Brzezinski and Rockefeller, they get the temporary victories, but they're not going to have the eternal one.
Now, the presidential election, the only hope that I've seen is kind of tarnished. It's interesting that Donald Trump, at least he's got enough money that he can't be bribed, he can't be influenced by money, but he's also got ties to the whole Jewish thing. Now again, I said I don't care who your grandmother slept with. Doesn't mean every Jew out there is a bad person. His daughter or his husband or boyfriend, whatever he is, might be a great guy. What about Donald Trump? What about and who else we got besides him that's not on the strings?
Well, I do like Dr. Ben Carson, the Afro-American neurologist. I've admired him for years for his Christian integrity and his intelligence. At the same time, I have to admit to you, Clay, that I've really not been following the debates because I've really gotten so pessimistic regarding the possibility of a presidential election producing a meaningful candidate who would actually get into office. They've been controlling these things for such a long time that I haven't really been paying as much attention as some people have in alternative media and putting my attention elsewhere. What's your own opinion of Trump?
Well, I think he could possibly, if he was really for the American people. He said all the right things. He's talked about immigration. He's talked about closing the borders. You know, he hasn't talked much about the banks, but he's got enough money that he could probably do that. And it worries me. The Jewish connections worry me. But again, you know, I've financed Jews. I've had Jews. My friend Jack Hara wrote the Emperor Wears No Clothes. And by the way, that's one other thing I'll touch on. You know, how do you feel about hemp? I think they stole our #1 cash crop. I think we ought to be regrowing that in every state. What do you think?
Well, I don't have a big opinion. When I was in college, we're talking 1969, I tried some and I really didn't like it, but the fact that I don't like it doesn't mean that it doesn't have medicinal value. One thing I've noticed, which is kind of interesting, Clay, is that I was at work one time and they had CNN on, and CNN for at least 2 hours was running things on the positive side of hemp, of marijuana, and I get the impression, and I may be wrong, that Big Pharma would like to legalize it and take control of it. I'm not sure.
I think you're right.
I don't have any strong opinions about itself. I know that Ron Paul has said he's in favor of the legalization of a lot of drugs that are illegal. When I look at the horrible things that Big Pharma is doing with legalized drugs, I imagine there's room for legalization of something like that.
I think you're right about that. I think if Big Pharma wants to take control of it, there's a problem with that. Why would we, you know, I was kind of excited about medical marijuana when they passed that in Arizona. I thought, wow, for the first time, I might not be a criminal anymore. but I didn't qualify for it. I couldn't get it because I'm too healthy. And I said, well, the reason I'm so healthy is that I've been smoking it for 45 years. James, listen, I appreciate you being on my show. I'd like to have you back again. You're welcome anytime. And the show will be up under your name. It'll be up under there. You can download that. You ought to put it on your website and let people know. More people need to come to freeamerican.com. I'd appreciate any help I can get.
I will definitely do that, and thank you for what you're doing. It's been delightful talking to you. You're a very knowledgeable man, and you've also been at it for a long time, so keep up. And by the way, one reason why it's tougher to sell magazines these days, I can't sell books as well either. It's not that the books or the magazines aren't as good. It's just that people are looking for free information on the internet. It's just harder to sell hard copy.
Yes, sir.
No pun intended, yeah. But we need to keep at this battle.
Okay. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Clay. Bye-bye now.